Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to our final session of the ALN Conference, which takes the form of a panel discussion on topics relating to our theme of inclusivity. My name is Mirza. I'll be chairing today's discussion, and I'm looking forward to a very rich and interesting discussion with our excellent panel. So a very warm welcome to our virtual panel, and a very big thank you for giving your time and be willing to share your reflections and experiences with us today. So in the interest of time, because we do have a lot of questions to get through, I'll just briefly introduce everybody before we get started on our first question. So I'd like to introduce Alex Biwott, who is a Digital and Communications Assistant at Teesside University. Give us a wave, Alex. Just been in the role for a few months, so very, very new to the area. We've got Susie Connor, who is a student of Library and Information Management at MMU. So, you know, on the professional course, looking to come into the profession. We've got Gary Elliott-Cirigottis who's Director of Library Services at the Open University. And we've also got Alison Hicks, who is the Programme Director of Library and Information Studies at UCL. Welcome, Alison. And finally, Josh Sendall, who is the Associate Director at the University of Nottingham, and who many of will have seen his keynote speaker, our keynote speaker from this morning. So thanks, everybody. Just in terms of practicalities, I'm sure you're aware that we can't actually see the chat on the platform. So if you do want to post a question, please can you post it in the question and answer section, and we'll be able to see those as they come in. We do have quite a number of questions that have already been submitted, excuse me, and we'd like to get through as many of those as possible. I'll try and pause after each one so we can actually just take any comments or observations that we might want to pick up in terms of supplementary questions from everybody who's listening to the session today. So thanks, everybody, and we'll get started with our first question. This one has been submitted from Daniel Pounds, and he's asking the panel for some thoughts on how we can improve the student experience for first generation working class students. The context of the question is really that, you know, barriers still do exist, particularly within some Russell Group universities, and it's really just some thoughts and reflections on, you know, how we can improve that for working class students going forward. Can I put that question to you, Susie?
Yeah, no problem. So this question is quite relevant, I guess, because I'm currently a student, a master's student, and I spoke to a number of my peers actually and got some of their input as well, and they had some really good points. Largely, I think, you know, one of the biggest obstacles is money and funding. There are, you know, kind of loans that you can go for with undergrad. But I know with masters, there's you can have the tuition fee loans, but there's nothing on top of that. So you do need to support yourself. If you don't have family or other people to support you financially, you have to support yourself. So it can be extremely overwhelming and quite daunting coming into education, balancing that with living really and having a job on the side. I know when I spoke myself, I'm coming back into education as a mature student. So it's been quite a while since I did my undergrad degree. I know I was extremely nervous about going back into it. I thought I wasn't able to write an essay. I'd forgotten all of the skills I had during undergrad. But I did find with Manchester Metropolitan University, they had these courses, these writing skills and getting ready to learn workshops that really did help me. And I know those weren't actually available at the time that I did my undergrad. So I do see that as a positive step. And I think having things like that from the university, preparing students, not just expecting them to understand exactly what being in a university is all about, is a big part of it. Some of my peers said that their schools didn't really, a lot of the onus seems to rely on the schools to prepare students, but a lot of schools won't do that. They don't really expect students to go on to higher education. I know one of my peers said that her school tended to just have people coming in to talk about apprenticeships or enlisting in the forces. So it was quite a learning curve, taking that step from go in high school, secondary school, to go on to higher education. So it's understanding that not all students are going to be coming from the same background. A lot of skills that private school students, private educated students will have might not have been an opportunity for students from other backgrounds. So that's definitely a talking point that we've had and discussed quite a bit.
Oh, thanks, Susie. That's really interesting. I just, if I may, just share a quick example, just because you've triggered it as you were speaking. And it's not an advertisement for my own university, by the way, but we launched a new medical school in 2020, and the basis of that medical school was aimed at trying to encourage students from kind of working class backgrounds to enter the medical profession in so much as that it's still quite an elite profession. It's the top 20% that enter that. So the whole kind of, they took a very small cohort of students, so 30 students as opposed to perhaps medical schools that take, cohorts of 300 usually. And the criteria was that you were from a deprived neighbourhood, low income background, you went to a non-selective school. So it was a sort of targeted intervention in effect. And it's really to diversify the medical profession so it better reflects the the communities it serves. So I think what part of that course is really about what you were talking about, Susie, that sort of confidence building, and actually those students seeing themselves as being able to go into those professions and be on a par with perhaps other students who have got more reference points for that type of thing. So I think that confidence building, those sort of foundational kind of courses that you refer to are really, really key, aren't they, in terms of encouraging and creating that sort of successful route. Just Alison, can I bring you in on this topic as well for any reflections from a particularly a library school perspective?
Yeah, I noticed Gary had his hand up. Gary, did you want to have a quick comment?
I thought it was such a great question, and I think obviously, and again, Maria, not wanting to, I'm not advocating for the OU, but I think there's a lot of learning kind of points from us, obviously from our open entry kind of policy that we have within the university, which I think are really interesting. I think that scaffolding piece that's come up already, the skills for sort of preparedness, the structuring of the courses, and the scaffolding that goes through as you move through your journey within your either degree program, if that's what it is, but also I think there's something fundamental about the student voice within the development of the courses. I think that obviously has a major impact in relation to improving the student experience, and the inclusion of that within the design and development of the course, I think is really significant. And being able to see yourself or be able to hear yourself within those courses, which is significant. So I think it's a great question. I think there's a lot of different opportunities there to really improve that experience. Sorry, Alison, leave it.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
quickly add on to that yeah, I think there's a huge onus on library schools to improve things and to reach out to working class communities to recruit them to our programs. Historically, probably that hasn't been the case, so I think there's a lot of work for us to do. I'm really inspired by that CILIP's moving forward with the apprenticeship scheme, which I think will be a really great complement to traditional library education, and hopefully will introduce a different range of people to librarianship. I also think there's a huge amount of research that could be done on this topic. I'm really inspired also by the recent CALC conferences, Critical Approaches to Library Conference. And I know that Andrew Preeter and Darren Flynn have been doing some really important research in this area. So really encourage people to follow their work as well. One of our archives colleagues have been doing a widening participation scheme as well, which is a paid scheme, so where people can get some experience before coming into the archives profession. That's the first one is going to be this summer, so I really I'm looking forward to sort of following how that goes, because I think that would be something we would like to replicate for librarianship at UCL as well. So yeah, lots of different ways in which we can do more work towards achieving this really great goal.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, and I think we do have questions later on in terms of recruitment practices, but I think as you've pointed out, it's actually encouraging a wider diversity of people into the profession in the beginning, isn't it, in terms of those early stages, probably even, you know, within our school and colleges kind of career offer, and kind of seeing that as a positive choice and awareness of what the profession can offer, and that there's, you know, a multiplicity of routes as well into that. Any final comments on that before we move on from anybody? No, thank you. Okay, our next question. Does the panel think there's a risk of inclusivity activities becoming focused on one area of diversity at the cost of others? Josh, can I bring you in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question, and I'm not too sure that it will come at the cost of others. I think to some extent, if you're really going to engage in meaningful EDI work, part of the process is about identifying those members of staff who have particular interests or expertise or lived experience in relation to a individual protected characteristic, for example. And it can be really good to work with them, to support them as an ally, to enable them to support others. So there's something here around not a critical mass, but just the genuine level of interest and understanding within your service of a particular scenario. I think I would just also say that there are always opportunities for library services to interface with other professional service areas of the institution. And so if there's a feeling within your service that there's a particular area of EDI that you're not yet giving appropriate attention to, then you can always reach out to those pockets of good practice elsewhere within your university, or identify initiatives at other institutions that you could emulate and adopt. And absolutely, you know, always identify those people within your library who will support you in your endeavours. I think the fundamental thing is that we're making progress in relation to EDI, and that's always a fundamentally good thing. However, if you pause, reflect, and recognise that there is a substantial gap in relation to a particular protected characteristic, then there is very likely still a need there and an opportunity to bridge that gap in some way.
Brilliant, thank you. Any thoughts from the panel? Any other thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, just to build on largely what Josh just said, which I really agree with, that I think it's important to think that there's no limit to inclusivity. You know, it shouldn't be seen as minority groups needing to compete with each other for representation and inclusiveness. It's an ever-growing thing in the larger window of inclusivity in institutions, I think the better. And I think, you know, it should be seen as always something that you can build on, always something you can improve. And as Josh said, if there's a minority group that's being underrepresented that you've identified, reach out to those groups. And I think it's important to include the voices of diversity firsthand as well, to have that representation and ensure that the inclusivity is actually doing something positive, actually building on something.
Yeah. No, it's easy to make assumptions, isn't it? Just sort of linked to that question, and it's something that Josh highlighted in his keynote, which was about the importance of that sense of belonging. You know, we know that's a key ingredient for students transitioning into HE, particularly in that first year. You know, we talk about a sense of community and learning and creating that. So in terms of, is there one thing that you would suggest from your perspectives in terms of that we can do as a library that would really signal that quite tangibly? What for you would be one thing that we could do?
I'm happy to just kick off with a wonderful initiative that my colleague Paul Newnham led at Lancaster University, and that was creating an equivalent of reading groups, but for a particular documentary. So Nagam and Chetty's Let's Talk About Race, and then staff came together. Paul created a safe environment in which we could have discussions essentially about what we'd watched, and that enabled just a deeper sense of understanding and empathy, and that created a feeling of belonging and appreciation. The colleagues of mine were working really hard to engage with some quite tricky topics and acknowledge their own biases. So that made a real difference for me. That's one thing that you could think about emulating, playing to our strengths in the biblio space through equivalence of reading groups on particular subjects.
Yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts from the panelists?
Well, with just building on what Josh was saying, one of the things from my own personal experience was one of the biggest causes of people being excluded or anything along those lines is generally if ignorance breeds intolerance. Usually, that's usually the pattern it follows. And a very wise man a few years ago taught me that. And looking around the way of the world, particularly now, there's so much, and that progress of intolerance has gotten so rapid. It's spreading through so many means of communication. We're being barraged on so many different levels. We can't even move. Even just being briefly on social media, you get barraged with someone's opinion on this, and not necessarily an informed one. And so, whenever you put people together, there have been multiple studies. I've lost it in my giant pile of notes, unfortunately, but I really wanted to get this right. But the fact that whenever you encounter someone else's perspective, whenever you encounter someone from maybe a different sexual orientation to you, someone different perspective, when you're open-minded and your views get challenged by someone else's experience, you naturally that empathy level will go up, and empathy is the enemy of intolerance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we say, you know, things have got very polarized, haven't they? Increasingly so. And actually, you know, discussion and debate and openness and the forums for that are really critical to kind of, you know, defeating some of those extremes, aren't they? At that space, I think, which is what you're talking about, Josh, in the middle of people actually, you know, sharing their experiences, sharing, you know, and there's diversity across the piece, isn't there, in terms of those from within a community. You know, there's a whole range of experiences. There's not one single experience. No, that's really, really interesting, and that sort of leads, I think, one of the questions we had was around the term decolonisation and how that can often create a barrier and become kind of a bit of a polarised debate. Really, how can we kind of overcome this in terms of that it doesn't derail the work that needs to be done? And I think, Alex, you wanted to kind of come in with some comments on this.
Yeah, well, my degree is in history, and one of the things I actually studied, I was very lucky to study a history of Islamic radicalism and the history of Britain and its impact on the world. And one of the things I've always felt and thought about is, no matter what we try and do today, even in this panel, is coloured by the actions of people long dead. We cannot change what the colonization, the behavior of the past, and as well my own personal experience. I'm half Kenyan, and so having grown up in Britain, I've had two very distinct opinions all around me at all times from a very young age, and so having that experience of, well, to put it bluntly, there wasn't in the town I grew up in, there was no real safe option for me to hang around with. I always had to move about and take other people's opinions. And with the idea of the British Empire, it was amazing how the thing that always struck me was how many people always seem to think of it as this great triumph. And when you actually look at it, and when you're trying to change it and trying to change the stigma around decolonization, it's almost become a buzzword. If you mention decolonization, people get very defensive, and they almost feel personally attacked, and it feels almost like a pivot away from the actual structural problems that do exist, that have been left behind by the past and what's happened. And decolonization of any system is going to be difficult. It is going to be difficult, to steal a phrase from Kit, but you've got to do it. Otherwise, you're going to have people falling through the cracks all the time. A system that was built in the 1800s is not going to work in 2022. There are going to be either by accident or by malicious intent. And so the way you can really tackle the stigma around decolonization is to really just focus away from the buzzwords and the debate, is actually look, what is this system what problems is it creating, and how do we solve it?
Yeah. And I think obviously historians like David Olusoga, who have actually really given voice to those sort of hidden histories, haven't they, on sort of mainstream television, and actually histories that people weren't aware of. It's that sort of education piece, really, isn't it, in terms of understanding the stories that haven't been told, you know, through kind of, you know, our sort of traditional curriculum and what that means. Any observations from anybody else in the panel?
Yeah, I can jump in with a little bit. So I think from my, obviously I want to acknowledge it's really hard. The political climate at that moment makes it very hard as well, you know, when we're getting pressure to not include critical race theory in education, etc. Obviously makes it very challenging and adds to this stigmatization. One thing, obviously, I would always argue for more research, and I just point to some research done by one of our students, Sally Hamer, who's at the University of Oxford now. She did a project when she was doing her dissertation on unconscious bias, or bias in reference email services, and that was a really powerful piece of work, because you could see immediately, you know, there was a huge amount of difference depending on how someone signed their name, what their name was, that there was a difference in service that they received. And I think that was such a powerful piece of work, because, as I said, it sort of just provided that evidence that maybe, you know, we need to question our unconscious biases, or whatever was going on there. But at the same time, obviously, I want to recognise that doing that research, doing decolonising research is really hard. And so I think we need to provide support for people if they are going to go and do research like that. And that's definitely where I see my role. You know, I've got another student doing research looking into the history of decolonising work in libraries, and she's coming across some really ugly, horrible things that were published, you know, in the 70s and 80s. So I see it kind of as my role to be that debrief or sounding board, so she can express some of her feelings about having to deal with this topic, you know, and the risks involved with that for her. So again, I think it's really important, even though I argue for more research, that we provide enough support for people to be able to do this research, because it is really tough stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I'm just going to take a question on the chat, which actually links to our next question beautifully. And that's really about the job market and the fact that it is quite competitive at the moment. But in terms of diversifying the workforce, what things should potential candidates look out for, or questions to ask that may signal the library is an inclusive anti-racist workplace? Anybody got any views on that?
I think, you know, to some extent, you can certainly look at the online presence of the institution that's posted the advert and ascertain whether there are positive statements that signal the intent. But more than that, look a little bit deeper and see what initiatives they're actually undertaking within the institution, support that may have been provided, say, for example, around the Black Lives Matter movement. These are things that can signal. But I think ultimately, you really can't underestimate the value of that informal conversation opportunity with a hiring manager, where you can ask some, you know, really direct questions that will give you just a sense of the institutional maturity around EDI, and, you know, the way in which they respond to your, you know, your simple question: what can you tell me about the equality, diversity, and inclusion approach of your university, of your library service, and see what the responses are.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you. Any final comments on that?
Sorry, Maria.
Sorry, Gary. Yeah, please go on.
Add to that. So I think they're tremendous things to get a sense of that organisation and where they're heading, and their view in the way in which Josh has just said. And I think absolutely should be open, and the institution should be available to answer those really kind of detailed kind of questions that you might want to consider. I think the other things maybe to think about in relation to looking at that, the way in which perhaps the institution's conducting, you know, those interviews, the way in which the wording is said, and, you know, it's not just you know, how inviting are they in relation to how much you can see yourself in that organisation. So, for example, a presentation of some videos around what they're looking for in relation to the candidates they're looking for and how they're presenting themselves, but really around the way in which they're, and from an inclusive point of view, you know, how those interviews are conducted, how they are looking for that diversity of individual to really kind of add to the organization's, you know, collective understanding and thinking about where they are in order to support a diversity of student coming into the organization. And I think you'll get a good sense, I think, from what Josh has just said in terms of just having a dig around and asking sensible questions. I think that there are some subtleties to that in relation to how that is engaged, and I think you should be very aware and paying attention to the spider senses that are tingling in relation to some of those responses that you get back. And to be guided by those, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, Gary. Just on a more general point, I guess, you know, do we feel we're being proactive enough in terms of encouraging, you know, people from a broad range of backgrounds to consider working in our services, and that it's seen as a positive career option? In terms of, can I put it to sort of Alex and Susie, sort of what made you kind of choose the path into libraries? how did you arrive at that point? Was it while you were at university? Was it sort of at college? What sort of perceptions did you have of the profession before you joined it, as it were? Can I say Susie first?
Okay, all right. That's a good question. For me, as I said, it was a long time ago that I completed my undergrad, so I went into the working world before I made the decision to basically have a change of career. I've always had an interest in working in libraries or archives. I mean, I still haven't, I'm just about to start the second year of my part-time degree, so I'll be coming up to the point of looking for a job soon. One of the largest things that put me off initially was this, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, the information professional libraries are on their way out. You're not going to have a career in it, which I don't agree with. I don't believe anymore. It was something that I found daunting when I was younger during the financial crisis, when the key thing was trying to find a job. And I remember at the time it was very hard to be critical. I think it's such good advice to, when you're going into a job interview, you're being just as critical of that institution as they are of you. You're seeing if they will be the right fit for you. So I think it's right asking those hard questions. I think it's also important not just to look at what they're saying, but what they're doing. Look at their social media imprint. Look at what the press is, if they are actually taking actions that are inclusive. That will tell you a lot more about the stances of the institution, of the company. So I think but it's easier said than done, because you want to have a job. It's getting the experience, it's being able to find that experience while supporting yourself. So it's a challenge, but I think, yeah, it's worth being quite critical when you go into job interviews. Just being, not just saying, am I good enough? Saying, are they good enough for me? Yeah. Working there, will I be happy there? Will I feel included?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a two-way process, isn't it? I'm a big believer in cultural fit, actually, in terms of organisations, and, you know, certainly it's, you know, are you going to, as you say, kind of, is it going to match your values as well, in terms of what you see and the rhetoric versus the reality of that? Alex, how did you find your way into libraries?
To be perfectly honest, I kind of fell into it. I've been bouncing around the customer service industry for about 10 years. And I've always had a passion for history. I've always had a passion for university. But I actually, because of COVID, I'd moved my entire life from the Midlands up to the Northeast. And then coincidentally, roughly around the time that I was going, right, okay, I've done the big stuff, I've moved, I've done all this, I kind of need a job now, kind of trawling through. And then me and my mother found Teesside University. I got the interview and I got the job, and here I am. So, but the thing that that has really differentiated, and one of the things that's attracted me to working in a library environment is, as you've all said, you've kind of all stolen my points while I was thinking them up, really. But I felt like a good fit in this environment. My personality works with it. Previously I've been working in places that, yeah, they paid the bills, but weren't necessarily good for either my mental health or just who I was as a person. And so finding Teesside University and being able to work in an environment that is not only supportive of who I am and the way I work, but also I don't actually, in other places, the inclusivity and the EDI, as Josh mentioned, felt like they ticked a box. Yeah, it felt like they've just, okay, we've mentioned it, that's done. Meanwhile, in Teesside University, I actually do feel like a member of the team. Even though I've been here 3 months, I've had the person opposite I work with literally just say, it feels like you've been in this office for years. And so it's such a welcoming and kind environment. What's not to love about it?
Yeah. Is it something you would ever have considered you know, in your sort of, as you were forming those career choices, I guess is what I'm asking. And I'll give you a context for this.
Okay.
Which is my husband is second generation sort of British Asian. He's he's done careers work in schools, and still there's a lot of, I think, kids from that his community that actually still go into quite stereotypical careers, you know, because that's sort of defined by your culture almost often, or limiting, you know, in terms of that. And I think, you know, he's somebody who likes to challenge that. So often, I guess, I suppose what I'm asking are there any barriers that you experienced about, you know, typical careers you might go into?
Now that is a wonderful question, because I've never really thought about it. Even if, and this is me being 100% honest, because you caught me off guard with this.
Sorry.
No, it's fine, 100%. I like being caught off guard. It makes me think. But essentially, I'm the type of person that I focus on the present. I focus on what's going on around me. I'll always think about the peripheries, but when it came to am I the right, I was more focused on am I the right fit for this profession, rather than is my skin color or my personal choices affecting my ability to get into this position. I might be quite privileged in that regard, that I never really had to think about it. My encounters with intolerance and exclusivity and being excluded wasn't really encountered on a job level. It was always a more social thing than anything else. And it's more how like everyone else has been saying, how a job feels than anything else. Yeah, I have seen others go through those barriers and struggle with the difference between their personal lives and their professional lives. But myself, I've been very lucky.
Brilliant. So, thank you for that. No, I think Josh just wants to come in briefly.
Yeah, and just briefly, I reflected not long after I started working in academic libraries that it seemed to me that the first rule of working in academic libraries was that you only tell other people in academic libraries how wonderful it is to work in academic libraries. And it is. It's a great profession. You know, libraries have existed since time immemorial, and I don't think they dwindle. And I think our role is growing, and they're a great and stimulating place to work, especially for values-driven individuals. But the work is also multifaceted. You know, it goes far beyond the stereotypical notions of reshelving. You know, we're working with digital technologies across the digital horizon. We're working on EDI issues. We work in a myriad of ways that people don't know about. And every opportunity I have to talk about my role and talk about what it means to be a library information and knowledge professional, I take that opportunity. And you can imagine what a thrill I am to be joined over the Christmas dinner table. It's a great place to work, and we need to tell everybody it is.
Yeah, and I think that extends to our careers services as well, actually, in schools and colleges. And just, I am conscious of time, and just kind of linked to that really is we talk. Obviously, you've made the point about how important that cultural fit is, and how important the culture of an organisation is. Just what kind of leadership behaviours do you think people need to see, or what do you need to see to make you believe that it is a genuinely inclusive culture? Gary or Alison?
So yeah, but Maria, that's an interesting kind of conversation. I could have to bite my lip to not launch into the sort of how I arrived at library. But coming back to the cultural piece, you know, I'm expecting to see a really strong leadership shadow. I'm expecting to be able to see a focus on the individual, the strengths of the individual, what they bring to the organisation, the value of those strengths and diversity of thought into that. And I'm expecting leadership to really kind of focus on bringing that out of the individual, creating absolutely the right environment to bring that individuality out and be able to, you know, to use it to the best possible strength of both the individual in terms of providing the opportunity and to the organisation. That is absolutely what I expect to see, and I expect to see it. I expect it to be absolutely, as I said, the shadow. I expect to see it in action. I like to see it actually being played out in front of me, so that I've got a real sense of confidence in me being able to act that out myself as an individual, as an employee within that organisation, and know that that is valued. That's what I would see, particularly from a lived experience of somebody who has an invisible, in that sense, non-seen sort of declared disability. I expect to see that, and to be wanting to kind of get those differences noted. I think, Maria, really, really important to see that.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. And Alison?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, definitely being an ally is one of the most important things I can do. Speaking up and challenging whenever I can. Also to use the power of my privilege as a way to sort of promote voices of particularly the students I work with and their voices. Also to use the privilege of UCL really as well to be able to support student projects related to marginalised groups and opening and diversity. So I think those are two of the important things. A couple of other things is trying to sort of putting my money where my mouth is, like making sure that I can support students with time and money if possible. So perhaps if students of colour need to take a bit more time because they don't trust, say they've had bad experiences in the past with education, and so it takes a bit longer maybe for them to build up the trust in me or other people, then acknowledging I need to provide this pastoral care, the support, the time for students to feel comfortable to do the projects they want to do, for example. So I think that's also really important to acknowledge that those barriers exist. And then finally, on a very practical level, I think, so I'm also the editor of the Journal of Information Literacy, and we recently published a decolonisation article. And so I was just had a plan in mind in case there had been any negative press feedback about that. Obviously, with the current political climate, it was a potential occurrence. So just having a plan to be able to support that author in case anything did happen that they needed support with to deal with press or media attention. So that's sort of just another way to support, to provide that leadership in my role.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting perspective. I am conscious of time ticking away and the fact it's nearly lunchtime. So just a final question for all the panel, please. Is there one thing we could all do when we leave this conference, and this is a call to action, that would help increase inclusivity? So who wants to go first with that one? Susie, can I pick on you? Yeah.
All right, I'll go first. For me, largely my biggest take home from this conference, I think, is just to keep talking about EDI. Keep pushing for it at ourselves. Just if we keep talking about it, then it will keep growing and improving, and it'll become the institutions that should hopefully realize the importance of inclusion and equality. And I think also, like, experts through experience, have consultation with diverse groups, actually understanding what is needed through inclusion, not just what you might assume if you're not from a minority group. Always try and work to minimize the risk of processes overtaking the people that they're designed to empower. I think that's really important. And to remember, when we're talking about inclusivity and equality, we're talking about human beings, we're talking about human rights. It's not just a concept, it's not just a tick box, it's humans, it's us. So that's the biggest take home that I have.
Thank you, Susie. Alex, you're next on my window. Can we have some thoughts from you?
The most important thing for me that I've taken away from this whole discussion is the importance of recognizing other people's needs. Whether you're from a minority group yourself, or whether you're from the majority, you are the main character in your story, but you're not the main character in other people's. And one of the biggest when I mentioned ignorance before, one of the biggest things that I've encountered on that level is when people can't see beyond their own vision, which is a kind of fluffy way of putting it, but they can't see beyond their own world, their own views, their own opinions. It's all about the self, rather than actually understanding that we are a community. There are other people that have differing levels of need, and if you listen to someone else's story and just widen your perspective that little bit, that'll go a long way to improving everything as a whole.
Excellent advice.
Thank you.
Gary.
Well, no, Alex has just stolen mine. So I was just about to sort of say, really go find some individuals, get them to share their lived experience, understand that lived experience, get to see that experience from a different perspective, not just your own, in the way in which Alex has just said. We've had a really interesting and really insightful mentoring scheme here at the university, where we've been, I've been mentored by other members of staff from different ethnicities or different diversities in that sense, just to really bring home those different perspectives and enable me to think and consider my role in supporting other individuals around that. So that would be a very practical, I think, element to kind of engage with or to bring in within an organisation.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you. Josh?
My heart sang when Alex said, empathy is the enemy of intolerance. It's a wonderful line, and I think it's genuinely true. So I would say, be more kind. Let yourself be led by compassion and a genuine desire to understand what's going on in somebody else's world. It seems like a small thing, but you just never know what somebody else is facing in their daily lives. And your interactions with an individual from a minority or marginalized community, when they're positive, they can make an absolutely transformational difference. You can bring people into library spaces in a way that's inclusive and can enable and empower them. So be more kind. That would be my key piece of advice.
Thank you very much. And finally, Alison.
Thanks. So yeah, I would say that for me, it's been about sort of maybe thinking about, well, I'm obviously white, able-bodied, cisgender. So I think for me, it's about training myself to see everything through a diversity lens or anti-racist lens, or and I think I found that quite hard initially, but just, everything. So what am I teaching, what I'm researching, what I'm writing, what I'm designing, like, what does this mean? What am I missing? What are the implications for different people who are not like me or different communities? And that took a while, but I think that's just, now it's can become much more automatic. And also thinking about it in everyday life, who are the people I'm following on Twitter? Who am I not following on Twitter? Who are the people I'm reading? What music am I listening to? And thinking there as well about how to increase your understanding of the world around you by those small changes. So I think, yeah, that's sort of just moving away from designing services like, well, we've decolonized the reading list, we're done here, but actually focusing on you and sort of rethinking about how you see the world is what I would say.
Yeah, always things to learn, awareness and openness, isn't it, to all those different experiences. Right, that's sort of the end of our panel session. I'd just like to thank our fantastic panelists for all their thoughts and observations and their genuine openness and sharing all of those kind of with us today and giving up obviously the time. I hope everybody's had a great conference. There's been a whole range of engaging presentations. The whole point is to take away those ideas and share them at your institutions. So if you please join me in thanking the presenters, the keynotes, and everybody, of course, behind the scenes who actually organised the conference, which is a huge, enormous amount of work that goes into it. And I think they've done a fantastic job. The slides and the recordings will be added to the website in due course. And it leaves me finally just to announce, of course, the winners of the prizes. And I will have those names in a minute. So, yeah, first of all, we've got the winner of the quiz from both days. So from yesterday, congratulations to Jennifer Beju, who wins a £25 voucher from ALN, which will be on its way to you soon. We've got congratulations to Ruby Hill for her wonderful picture, and has also won a £25 voucher from Amazon. And thank you to OCL for the donation of that. Congratulations to Jamie Carruthers for a great caption on Ruin the Skeleton, which is waiting for inclusivity to just happen by itself, which is a very fitting statement, I think, for the theme of our conference. And you have won a Google Nest. So thank you to EBSCO for donating that. And last but not least, congratulations to Sarah Monks, who is top of the leaderboard for engaging with the platform and has achieved a whopping 731 points. And you've won the hamper from AnyBook. So I think that's absolutely all the prizes given out and distributed, and they should be on their way to you very soon. Just before we close, can we have all your feedback, any feedback on the conference? Please do fill in the form. And again, as an extra incentive, we are offering a £25 voucher. So please do fill that in. It's really valuable. You know, we always learn from it in terms of planning for the next time. So hope you've enjoyed it. Have a great weekend, everybody. And for those of you who are celebrating Eid this weekend, Eid Mubarak. Thank you.